So hopefully you watched that clip and saw that you took a perfectly attractive woman and not only made her up with a lot of makeup, but then also photoshopped her to make her even look different and completely unattainable. No one's neck is that long. No one's eyebrows are shaped like that. And yet this is the information that we consume, and we feel bad about ourselves. I'm just going to insert a study that was conducted where they had men who were in long-term committed relationships with women look at a Victoria's Secret catalog before then interacting with their romantic partner. And what they found was that before looking at the Victoria's Secret catalog, they rated their romantic partner much higher in attractiveness than they did after they viewed the Victoria's Secret catalog. These kinds of messages give women the impression that they have to look a certain way in order to be desirable, and really their worth declines or is not as high if they aren't meeting the standard. And so girls internalize this a lot, and that's why they may be on average less satisfied with their appearance than boys are. During adolescence, boys express a preference for thinner girls, and girls are aware of that, and so they recognize that if they're carrying extra weight, that they're going to be less desirable to their peers, and so that makes them think that they need to change their appearance. Um, Boys expressing preference for thinner girls may be in part due to peer pressure or their own consumption of media messages as well. Girls are more prone to depression after puberty, and a lot of people think that it's tied back to all of these concerns about how they look and feeling like at the heart they are not adequate, that they're just not enough. So when we talk about the relationship between attractiveness or feeling attractive and depression, we have found that people who in adolescence report that they feel that they are attractive, in adulthood, they tend to report higher levels of self-esteem, and they tend to report that they're happier than people who, when they were in adolescence, reported that they did not feel attractive. So these feelings really have a big, long-lasting impact into adulthood. A person carries that with them, even as, for example, we talked about different rates of maturity. And so as the person matures into, their secondary sex characteristics, and they become very appealing to their adult peers, they still are carrying inside of them that adolescent feeling of inadequacy. And so you see a person who, for example, if they were overweight as an adolescent, but they shed it just through the process of maturation and going into adulthood, or maybe they started working out, maybe eating better. I mean, there are different factors that can go into this. They may become very obsessed with the concern that they might gain weight and thus lose their attractiveness, and that their current partner may ultimately reject them if they were to gain weight again, things like that. So these are things that sort of dog us throughout adulthood, that start in adolescence. So some health concerns in adolescence, basically this is a very healthy time. On average, very few adolescents have disabilities. Very few have any kind of chronic ongoing diseases. Of course, they catch infections and things like that, the flu and colds and mononucleosis and other kinds of things. But on average, they're very healthy, very unlikely to have any of these problems. The problems that they do have are typically preventable problems, like in adolescence is when they may start experimenting with smoking or drinking. Today, you're very unlikely to see a teenager taking up cigarette smoking, but they're likely to take up vaping, or to start drinking, or to use marijuana. And particularly now we're seeing an increase in adolescents using marijuana now that it's legalized, even though it's still illegal for adolescents. So they start to use these things that then in the long run can produce long-term problems. They start to engage in sexual activity. This is very typical for adolescents, and that can lead to a variety of sexually transmitted infections, and of course, it can lead to pregnancy. So these are things that adolescents tend to do that can lead to long-term effects. The number of teenagers who say that they've had sex has been declining over time. In 1991, 58% of boys and 51% of girls said that they had had sex. it's gone up and down. They've almost, the sexes almost met at 1997 and 1995, right? They almost got at the same rate. They broke apart again for a while there. They're back to about the same rate by 2009. But what we're seeing overall is this drop where now we're down to about less than half. We're very confident that it's less than half of um, kids graduating from high school have actually had intercourse um, that could lead to pregnancy. So that's actually, we're pretty happy about that. Delaying onset of sexual intercourse is an advantage because you can, reduce the likelihood of STIs. You can reduce the likelihood of pregnancy by delaying onset of sexual activity. But we still have a healthy number of high school kids who are graduating having had their first sexual intercourse. When we look at the things that tend to cause death for teenagers, we see that the most deadly thing for both boys and girls is motor vehicle accidents. And then the next most common is suicide for both sexes, then homicide, then cancer. You can see that all things are more likely to happen to boys than to girls. So there's just a higher rate of death among U.S. teenagers among boys than there is among girls. But the things that tend to kill them are common between the two sexes. Now, when you ask teens what they're concerned about with regard to their health, they'll say, well, I want to get my stress under control, or I'm overwhelmingly nervous, or they'll report that they've got skin problems. They really high rates of visiting dermatologists and things like that. Cosmetic problems, they're not happy with their nose, or they're not happy with their ears, or something like that. And then they are concerned about acute infections, like if I have the flu, I'm not going to be able to wrestle at state, or things like that. They're concerned about these acute things. Parents are concerned about their teenagers' risk of contracting an STI, or they're concerned about their teenager starting to use drugs, or they're worried about their teenager becoming pregnant or impregnating someone. So parents, you can tell, have concerns about things that are long-term, that could have a big impact on their child's life. And teens are concerned about very here and now issues, things that are affecting their life right now. So you can see that they're sort of at different, they're at odds with regard to what things they think need to be addressed and what things need to be, taken care of. Nutrition is something that is a big issue for adolescents because they are, world renowned for not really eating very well. During puberty, caloric needs do increase. As you're growing and you're developing, you need extra calories. So boys during puberty need about 2,800 calories. Girls need about 2,200 calories just to support the development of their organs that we talked about, right? The growing, that you're supposed to put on some weight during puberty. All of these things, it requires excess caloric intake. Unfortunately, we can be really hungry during puberty, and then we sort of learn to eat extra, and then we sort of carry that on past the growth spurt. And so one of our biggest issues in all the developed countries right now is obesity. What we mean by that is a skin fold measurement that's in the 85th percentile. I'm really reluctant to talk about BMIs because those don't take into consideration the muscle mass of the individual. Skin fold measurement does. And so having a skin fold measurement that shows that there is more subcutaneous fat than 85% of other people would be putting you in that that would put you in that 85th percentile, where we would then define it as obesity. So to flip that around, this would only cover about 15% of teenagers. You would have to have more subcutaneous fat than 85% of everybody else. And so that would be only 15% of teens in that category. What we have found in longitudinal studies is that overweight teens who are in that category, even if they lose the weight, tend to, as adults, display poorer health than their peers who were not overweight as teens. So there is a benefit to avoiding obesity in adolescence because it will have a long-term beneficial effect. The sooner you can shed the obesity or avoid developing it, the healthier you'll be as an adult. So even if the weight is lost, they found this association between being overweight as a teen and then poorer adult health. Now, I want to say something that kind of modifies this. There's been a lot of research trying to determine whether um, being overweight causes something, for example, like diabetes, or if pre-diabetic status actually causes the holding of weight. They're not exactly sure which way that causal relationship flows, and they're not even sure if it's a causal relationship. It's a correlation. So it's possible that some third variable is causing both the weight gain and the diabetes or the heart disease or whatever we're talking about. So I would like to make it really clear that we should not use this, what I just said, as an opportunity to shame or harass a teenager who is, carrying extra weight. First off, we're talking about teens who are in the 85th percentile, who are the ones who are most likely to have the long-term effects. And then also, shaming and harassing someone doesn't usually cause them to change behaviors, particularly if the weight gain is not due to behavior. Even if they're already eating well, things like that. It's really hard to sort of goad someone into losing weight that is really difficult to lose. And so I don't want anyone to construe what I'm saying here as, see, I know somebody who, they're overweight and I should really encourage them to lose it or something like that. The person needs to lose the weight on their own because, gosh, we do not want to develop an eating disorder, right? Anorexia nervosa is the full name for the disorder where the person maintains a weight that is at least 20% below their ideal weight. So you know what ideal weights are, right? They're on a chart where again, it's like a BMI kind of thing, where they say if you're female and you're 5'7", then you shouldn't weigh. The perfect weight would be somewhere between 115 and 140, right? So if you're at least 20% below that bottom range, right? So you're at least 20% below the 115. And you maintain it like that. And you maintain it through excessive diet or excessive exercise. So if a person, a lot of times people think an anorexic only refuses to eat, but they also, for every calorie that they eat, they attempt to burn it off. And so they may do a lot of treadmill or bike riding or those kinds of aerobic activities that will help to shed those whatever calories they consumed. They're really preoccupied with food. A lot of times people think that a person with anorexia just doesn't care about food, but the truth is they're really obsessed with it, and they think about it, and they allow themselves to eat 100 calories for breakfast, and then they spend the next 3 hours thinking about what they're going to have as their 100 calories for lunch. They're really obsessed with it. And in fact, some anorexics love to cook. They will cook food for their family. They enjoy being around food. They like thinking about food, but they just can't let themselves eat enough of it. They have a distorted view of their own body. Here's a picture that was made by the girl on the left who has anorexia, described what she saw as she was looking in the mirror, and they made a picture of herself the way that she was describing herself, and that's how she sees herself. And I think we can agree, looking like a healthy person, she not only doesn't see that as a healthy person, but she sees that as a fat person. And she thinks, well, she's looking like she does on the left, that she looks like that on the right. She literally thinks that every bump that she sees is evidence of fat, that every bump is a sign of her failure to control her food intake enough. So this distorted view of their own body. So where does this come from? Some people blame the media. And when you look at sort of some cross-era spates of anorexia that we've seen in the West, back in the 1920s, when women first took off their corsets and started wearing very straight dresses, there was a sudden spike in the rate of anorexia of women who starved themselves literally to death. And it was sort of new to the Western medical establishment that a person would starve themselves to death. So it really attracted a lot of attention. It kind of went away for a while, and during the 30s and 40s, it was considered, having bones that showed was considered actually unattractive in the 30s and 40s, and into the 50s. And then in the 60s, the media started again with the straight clothes, and the lack of desire for curves in women became really popular in the 60s. And so a lot of people blame a model called Twiggy from that era because she was sort of the it girl. She was really, really thin, um, and no curves at all. And so a lot of people sort of blame her for the onset in the 70s of very thin American models. But the thin American models were not, did not look anorexic. They were really, really thin, though. They were really, really thin. And so some people say the media gives us these, images that, again, they may have stretched the legs to make them look longer, and that therefore makes them look thinner, and all sorts of other things that ultimately makes the girl who's consuming this media think, I'm not thin enough. I don't look like that. So I'm going to queue up this video in the playlist so that you can see it. You may have to click on "you're over 18" whether you are or not, but to watch this video. Some of these get flagged for the most ridiculous reasons. One of my lectures got flagged because somebody said that my lecture from human sexuality was inappropriate for under 18. I'm contesting it. Hopefully it'll get removed, but don't think that because it says age restricted that it necessarily has anything wrong in it. Okay, I'll see you on the other side of this video.